Howdy, minions, goons, and soon-to-be servants of the Nimzy Nova Empire. It's time to talk about Nintendo consoles. We got the Switch 2 coming out in just a few days, and it's time that we talk about Nintendo's history and what I think of their systems. Maybe y'all want this opinion, maybe you don't want this opinion, but you're getting it. It's in your feed regardless, so that means you have to watch it. YouTube can't be wrong. This is, of course, interesting to you. I say as 90% of you at least ignored the thumbnail, but that's not what's important here. We're not talking about those numbers. We're not talking about YouTube numbers today. We're talking about video game systems. So we're talking about the Nintendo ones, and I plan to do these for other systems too, like Sony, Xbox. Xbox will be a really short one. Sega, that's really it. Atari is also way too short to really rank. Anyway, we're not here for that. We're here for the Nintendo ones. I've got every Nintendo system here. The first one here is called the Color TV game series. This was Nintendo's first game console that was in the homes. This was back in the day before cartridge games. So this system had two paddles built into it so that you could play the games that came with it. The series comes in 5 different versions, and each version is a different game. Like I said, this was before cartridges existed, so they couldn't really do interchangeable games. So honestly, it's historically significant because it's one of the things that got Nintendo into video game consoles in the first place, which paved the way for all the other stuff that we know nowadays. But that said, it's poopy. It's poopy. Honestly, I should actually have a separate tier for never played. Let's be a little more honest with that. Never played. And honestly, I never plan to. Okay, so the NES. The NES is so overexplored. Anything that you have to say about the NES has been said a billion times before. It is heavily charted territory. There is no reason to talk about an NES. It's not oversaturated because I don't think there's a bunch of people talking about NES anymore. It's oversaturated in the sense that there's nothing left to talk about. There's no new takes that you can provide on NES. When you're talking about an NES game, it's just everybody knows already. There's no value in the conversation surrounding the NES. But as a system, I like it. I've played it quite a bit. It is severely lacking in the RPG department for me. I can only think of Final Fantasy. I can't think of a lot of RPGs that were on the system, but some of this video game series that we still play today got their starts on this system, so historically significant, but I don't think I would ever pick up an NES today. I don't think I would ever go to someone's house and go, oh, you got an NES? Cool, let's play it. No, I have access to NES emulation, and it's as simple as just turning on my handheld and picking it, and I still have no interest in doing it. So honestly, dumpster might be a little bit harsh, but I feel like the NES belongs there. I feel like there is nothing special or interesting about the NES. Well, we'll put it in C, because it popularized video gaming in general. Now, the SNES, and it had a lot more RPGs on it, and it had some seriously good ones too. It had a lot of the Final Fantasy games, it had Chrono Trigger, it had Robotrek, it had a lot of RPGs in general, and I think it's great because of that. But also, in terms of exploration, I feel like the SNES hasn't been talked about that much. I feel like people skipped over the SNES to talk about other things. I think there's more people that talk about Genesis than talk about the SNES, which is so weird because the SNES won so hard in that generation. The SNES was the thing that everyone was playing, and the SNES just had a better library than the Genesis in just about every way. It had everything the Genesis had, except it didn't have a lot of arcade games because Sega's always had a lot of arcade games, but I'm not big on arcade games anyway, and the SNES has a lot of JRPGs, a lot of RPGs in general. I can see myself totally going back to the SNES if it wasn't for the fact that the Game Boy Advance has most of those RPGs and in better versions. So I think every game that I would want to play on the SNES is better on the Game Boy Advance. So I'm putting the SNES in C, and that might hurt some of you old heads back then, but I didn't have an SNES growing up. I did have an NES growing up because my grandparents had one, and they had a lot of garbage games, and I'd rather play my Game Boy. My Game Boy Color was the first video game system that I ever had. Now, the Nintendo 64 is another system that I did not personally have, and I tried emulating it, and I looked at the library, and I looked through the whole library, and I was like, there's really not anything that I want to play here. The N64, I'm sure a lot of you are super nostalgic for some of the first party games, but there wasn't really anything on the N64 that I wanted to play. say, looking back on it. Like, I can go onto a website real quick and take a look at the top 10 N64 games, and I'm pretty sure that I will have no interest in those. I mean, it was technically impressive because it was full 3D and it was real 3D. Best 50 best N64 games of all time. Like, anything that came out on the N64 that is like top 10 has definitely been re-released now. Okay, except F-Zero. F-Zero's kind of died, but I don't like racing. Smash Bros, I'm not big on Smash Bros. Perfect Dark, like I said, I didn't grow up with this system, so they did the best they could in terms of camera control. I don't know why they like, it's so easy for me to say I don't know why they didn't use the analog stick for camera controls, but like, this was back before camera controls were even really a thing, before they were popularized, and Nintendo kind of popularized camera controls, so I guess I can see why they didn't do it. But N64 games, to me, have translated very poorly to the modern era and are not something that I would have any interest in going back to, or like even really exploring. Like Paper Mario, there's better Paper Marios. Star Fox 64, wow, it's just a remake of Star Fox SNES. Yeah, it's just a remake of the SNES Star Fox that runs at a higher frame rate, which is good. Banjo-Kazooie, I don't like platformers. Mario 64, I don't like platformers. GoldenEye, I was not playing shooters, and I've never been big on Zelda, so Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time don't really speak to me. There's nothing really on the N64 that I want to play, so like, it's hard for me to not put N64 in the dumpster, but I'll put it in the C because I mean, there is some stuff there, and I guess it's not over talked about outside of the top 10 that I just went over. GameCube, oh man, I have a lot of nostalgia locked up in the GameCube, and there's definitely some first-party GameCube games that I really, really like. There's the Pokémon spin-offs. There's the Paper Mario game, Paper Mario Thousand Year Door. I mean, that alone makes the GameCube great, but the GameCube, everything that it did, every other system at the time did better. The PS2 is way better, and I like the PS2 way better. I would put the PS2 probably in the S tier. The PS2 just had exactly everything that I was looking for, and the GameCube really didn't have that. There's some games that I have on the GameCube that I am particularly nostalgic for. Like, I can just take a glance over right now, like Baten Kaitos. I did like Twilight Princess, even though I'm not big on Zelda. Amazing Island is one of my favorites. The Fire Emblem series, which are expensive as hell to try and get now. I liked Super Mario Sunshine, even though I said I'm not big on platformers. I haven't played any of the Metroid games, but I definitely have a higher opinion of the GameCube than I do of the systems that came before it. The Wii is kind of a toss-up for me. The Wii was full of shovelware, of course, but there was some Wii games that are particularly very good. A lot of them were remasters or new play control versions of the GameCube ones, like new play control Pikmin and stuff like that. There's also, yeah, actually, the Metroid collection, which I still haven't touched. Like, I'm genuinely drawing a blank trying to think of anything in particular that I liked on the Wii outside of Wii Sports, of course. Everybody liked Wii Sports. My Wii collection is not that big. I do not have crap for Wii original games. I almost have more Wii U games. I never got into Super Mario Galaxy. Wario Land Shake It was kind of bad. I never really got into Mario Kart. I know there's some good stuff on the Wii that I just can't remember. Cooking Mama. Okami was great on the Wii. I think the Wii is at least as good as the GameCube because it can play the GameCube games just fine. So you always had your library of GameCube games on top of actually, you know, having some new Wii games as well. It's just the Wii, it was a challenge to find games for because there was so much shovelware. Alright, the Panasonic GameCube. This is a GameCube that could also play DVDs because Nintendo felt that one of the major selling points behind the PlayStation 2 was its ability to play DVDs. And yeah, that's true. But at this point, the GameCube had been out already, and people who had a GameCube or were going to buy a GameCube had bought theirs already, and they weren't going to buy a special Panasonic GameCube that had the ability to play DVDs. And also, I don't think it was super available either. It could play DVDs, audio CDs, MP3s, and CDs, as well as several other features. It was only released in Japan. Oh yeah, that would be a big reason why it didn't do well in the US. So just because of the lack of availability, like, I'm willing to say dumpster, because it feels like they didn't even really try to release it. If they weren't confident enough to release it across the world, like, they probably weren't confident enough in it it at all. The Wii Family Edition. But I don't know much about this one, so real quick, the wiki says, is a revision of the Wii that could only sit horizontally and removed GameCube support and no longer includes the stand. It came bundled with New Super Mario Bros. Wii and the original Super Mario Galaxy soundtrack. Not the game, just the soundtrack. This is going to go in dumpster tier for me. A Wii with the inability to play GameCube is worse than a GameCube and worse than a Wii, and it's just lacking in other features that would make it good. Just by being less than a GameCube, just by not being able to play GameCube, it was made worse. Now the Wii U had a really bad launch. When it did finally start to release games, it started releasing really good games, and you know they're really good games because when the Switch came out and they re-released them on the Switch, people were buying them up on the Switch because they are good games. It's just nobody wanted to buy a Wii U to play those games because people say it's because of the marketing. Yeah, the marketing is confusing. The term Wii U, it really is ambiguous onto whether it's a new system or not. If they put Wii 2 in the title, maybe it would work. But like, they've succeeded in weird marketing before. Like when you say new Nintendo 3DS, people know it's the newer one, but then they abuse the crap out of that. And what if they made an iteration after that? What would they call it? The new? And the Super Nintendo worked over the Nintendo, but I think it really came down to marketing and stuff like that. People really didn't know what a Wii U was. And actually, I have a fondness for a lot of Wii U games. There's a lot of Wii U games that are really good, like Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, Pikmin 3, Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, Kirby and the Rainbow Curse, Nintendo Land, best pack-in title ever. And you're missing out entirely because they never re-released it, because it only works on the Wii U. The Wario Land that they had on it had Fling and Frogs or whatever on it, and that's a really good sub-game. Like, that's a game that I would just pop in on its own to play. Ninja Gaiden 3 Razor's Edge got its launch on there. Bayonetta 2 got its launch on there. There's just a lot of good games that came out on the Wii U, but also ended up dying because the Wii U didn't do very well. Oh, on the Wii, I had Xenoblade Chronicles, and I really like that. There's also Xenoblade Chronicles X on the Wii U that's getting a remaster. Hyrule Warriors got its start on the Wii U. There's so many good games on the Wii U, it's just no one had one. So I think the Wii U is at least a B tier. I feel like it's on par with GameCube. Actually, I think there's more good games on the Wii U than there was on the GameCube. Oh my god, I'm gonna be the only person to put put Wii U in the A tier. Alright, so the Wii Mini, I don't know anything about this one. I do remember it coming out, and I remember it having less functionality. We're putting the Wii U back down on B. I can't in good conscience leave it an A. The Wii Mini, according to the wiki here, is a smaller version of the Wii console that, like the Game Boy Micro, was released after its successor, the Wii U. Like the Wii Family Edition, it removes GameCube backwards compatibility, which makes it useless. In addition, it also lacks many of the other Wii's features. I'm really reconsidering putting the Wii into C, because the Wii is only good on the merits that it is able to run GameCube. Anyway, the Wii Mini, like the Wii Family Edition, it removes backwards compatibility with GameCube. It also lacks many other Wii's features like internet connectivity, an SD slot, Wii LAN adapter, and only one USB port. It was first released in 2012 in Canada, and then North America and Europe. It looks really cool. It's got this nice red color. It came with Mario Kart, but it is lacking in functionality in general. And honestly, it's worse than the Wii Family Edition because it's lacking on things like an SD card slot, and it's just worse in every way compared to the Family Edition, other than it came with Mario Kart. NES Classic Edition. Okay, so this was before Nintendo did the Switch Online service and stuff like that, I believe, because the Switch, I think, came out after the NES Classic Edition, so this was really the Virtual Console did well on the Wii, the Virtual Console did well on the Wii U, people were enjoying buying these old games, and they're like, oh, we can resell these old games and still make a lot of money. So they took a lot of games and they put them on the NES, and they brought over some stuff that we didn't get to play before. So while I haven't played it myself, I do see the value in it, and also if you can hack it, you can put more stuff on it, which might make it a perfect little emulator box for some, but it was not supported for very long. You cannot find these in the wild anymore. This is something that should be timeless, that Nintendo just continues to produce. It's easy money, but again, it was only the NES, and if the NES is in C tier, then the NES Classic is also getting C tier, because it's not like it was made better by by just the merits of it being new. It just came preloaded with some stuff. Which one? Now, I have a Switch One myself, launch edition. it is a very underpowered system, and I said before it came out that it was going to be a very underpowered system, and it was not going to play the majority of its games at 60 FPS, and people told me to shut up and that I was ruining the fun. Come around to the Switch 2, and I found that I've changed sides. I'm on the side of the Switch 2 now, and everyone else around me is hating on the Switch 2. So I'm starting to see how annoying I was back then. There are a lot of good games on the Switch. A lot of them are just Wii U re-releases, but there's still quite a few Switch games that are on there. And this was really Nintendo's first time giving proper opportunity and support to third-party and indie in general. So I think like a lot of people would get a PC just for the sake of being able to play indie games. I think the Nintendo Switch was the first like Nintendo system that would really allow people to play just indie games on it and be pretty happy. And it was affordable too. $300 at the time. It's not bad. I think the Switch is at least a B, but I'm willing to put it between A and B. I think there are some things that do make the experience worse, like of course not having 60 FPS. There's some first-party games that don't get 60 FPS on it, and if you can't get 60 FPS with your own software, then I think your system's either underpowered or you're overambitious, and you need to just pull yourself back a bit. Don't overdo it. You need it to run good on your system more than you need it to be the best thing ever. So like a game experience is only made like you can make the best game ever, but if it runs at 10 FPS, it's a garbage game. Star Fox. The first Star Fox, for example. So technically impressive doesn't mean a good game. Star Fox 1 was technically impressive, but I wouldn't call it a good game. So I think the Switch deserves a slot in B. I don't like how expensive Joy-Con are. That's really my only complaint. I don't like how expensive the Joy-Con are. I don't like that one of the Mario parties is made to only work if you use all Joy-Cons. That was a dumb decision, and we know why they did it. They just wanted to sell more Joy-Cons. It had HDMI out, which was really great for me because I did not have a Wii U until after I had a Switch. So having HDMI out was really good for me because I was wanting to do streaming and YouTube and stuff like that. And this made it possible to work with my capture card. Until then, I had been using Xbox One and then PS4. So I do think this Switch was a big step forward for Nintendo. It really made a big jump into them being taken more seriously and being in every home. I wish I participated more in this generation than I did. Looking back on it, I regret not participating in the Switch 1's generation much more because it really was good. It's just not the best that it could have been. So SNES Mini Classic. So this one has a lot of SNES games on it, and they did some more licensing and got some third-party titles put on it as well. And then they took games that were previously not in the US and put it on the system and sold it in the US. So I do think it's at least on par with an SNES, but in terms of American audiences, there's games here that you can access here, but not on your actual SNES, making it a little bit better than the SNES, at least the American one. I think it still deserves to be on the same tier because its functionality is the same. It is getting access to essentially the same amount of games, and I can't say wanting to play Star Fox, a Star Fox that I haven't played before, makes me excited for it because I can't think of a single Star Fox that I've liked. Switch 2. It would be unfair to rank this anywhere. I did put it on this list here for the future in case someone wants to check out my tier list or someone uses my tier list. They can, move it around themselves and do it for their own list. But it is way too early to rank the Switch 2 anywhere. I think the Switch 2 has the potential to be a good system. I do think it's very pricey. I wouldn't say the system itself is overpriced because, like I've said before, there's some possible evidence. I'd say it's rumors right now still, but it looks like the Switch 2 may cost exactly that much to make, so they're not making any profit on it, which means it's not overpriced. They're selling it to you at cost. That's just how much things cost to make these days. So it is expensive. Don't get me wrong on that. I just don't think it's overpriced. There is a difference. And the games are overpriced. The games are 100% overpriced. But Nintendo did say that they are working harder to make the games and that extra cost is being used to prolong development times and ensure that the games are better. And if that is true, I'm willing to pay extra for better games because, I don't know, the past decade, games have been real hit and miss. Like, there's just some real stinkers out there. Like, there's some games that I've gotten hated or gotten and loved, and then the company got shut down and they weren't able to continue. Like, I was one of those people that played Borderlands pre-sequel. I loved it, but I even bought the season pass. They didn't refund me when they shut the game down and didn't finish the season pass, but it was around that time that I started noticing just how bad the game industry's gotten with game releases lately. And since then, it's been just a consistent downfall. And maybe the downfall's always been there. But yeah, if it does cost more money to make good games, then I guess I'm willing to pay a little bit extra. And someone did say in my comments already that the amount of value that you get out of a Nintendo game lasts much longer than just a couple of hours. Usually these are games you're playing for a pretty long time. So I'm not someone who buys a lot of brand new titles at $60 already. And when I buy a new game, it's usually an RPG, and those games usually last me a very long time. So I thought they had a good point, because I'm not someone who's buying a new game all the time anyway. I spend a lot of money on indie games. So yeah, it's too early to rank the Switch 2. If it turns out how I expect it to, I would put it in A tier. Well, actually, I would put it in B tier with the Switch 1, because currently I'm using it just to play Switch 1 games at 60 FPS. So if it functions exactly how I expect it to, I would put it in A tier. Not A tier, B tier. If it turns out to have some really good Switch 2 titles, and maybe Nintendo doubles back and goes back to $60 games, maybe I'll love it. Maybe I'll put it in A. Alright. Ball, Game & Watch. I did not play this specific Game & Watch, but I have played a Game & Watch before, and I played Tiger Electronics, and I played the Game Boy Advance games that all remake the Game & Watch games. So I played a lot of Game & Watch games. I've got more hours than anyone should have on Game & Watch. I should probably make a video on Game & Watch, at least on the remakes. But Ball is not one in particular that I have played, but we're not rating it on that. We're rating it on Game & Watches in general. I think for the time, for what it is, I think the Game & Watch is perfectly acceptable. I'm putting it in the C tier. So C tier doesn't mean bad. I would say C tier means average. It's a passing grade. Remember, D is like a failing grade, and then like C upwards is considered a passing grade. I think the Game & Watch passes, and it was okay for what was available at the time. The Game Boy Original. Oh, people are not gonna like my opinion on this. I think it belongs in the dumpster. Oh man. Yeah, people are not gonna like that. I think the Game Boy Original is not good. I played a Game Boy Original. My neighbor and friend at the time, she had a Game Boy Original, and I played it for a while, and I played Super Mario Land. I like Super Mario Land, but it was not good. Looking back, it was not good. It was okay. It was Mario, but I can't think of a single game on the original Game Boy that I thought was a good version or a better version of whatever game that was being backwards ported onto it. Like, every game that has been released in a series that has had a Game Boy Original version has been a lesser version of that series, in my opinion. I can't think of a single Game Boy Original game that is the best version of its game, and the pea green display is bad. Honestly, I'm gonna show my real fanboy hand. People say I'm a Nintendo glazer or whatever, but I think the Wonder Swan was better. The Wonder Swan was better in every way. Now, the Virtual Boy. The Virtual Boy also belongs in the dumpster. I haven't played a Virtual Boy firsthand, but I have emulated Virtual Boy games, and honestly, even if it wasn't in the all red color palette, it still hurts your eyes. No matter what color palette it's in, it hurts your eyes, because a monotone graphics that big and that close to your eyes is gonna hurt them, because they're pixels and inches from your eyes. The Virtual Boy was too ambitious without the correct technology available. It was just a bad idea from the start, and Gunpei Yokoi helped make the Virtual Boy. He also made the Game Boy Original, and he made the Wonder Swan. And the Wonder Swan was good, and I'm willing to totally ignore the Game Boy Original and the Virtual Boy. You know, we all make mistakes. But I think he really nailed it with the Wonder Swan, so I'm gonna forgive him for it. I'm gonna pretend he didn't have a hand in these things, but the Virtual Boy is pretty bad, and it has like the smallest library out of all the systems. There's some interesting titles on there, and some really expensive ones, like the SMT game that's on there, the Jack Frost Bros, I think it was called. Really interesting titles on there, but they weren't good. They weren't great. I'd say they weren't much better than a Game Boy Original game. They were a little bit better, but not much better. All right, and then this one, I gotta look at what this one is, because I don't know what it is off the top of my head. Game Boy Pocket. Similar to the Game Boy, but slimmer, with a monochrome screen rather than the original pea soup screen. It takes 2 AAA batteries and lasts for a little less time. The first releases of the Game Boy Pocket... Oh yeah, that's what I forgot to mention. The Game Boy Original, it took like 4 AA batteries, which is way too many batteries. And this didn't even have a backlight, so like, what was taking up all that power? It was also huge, like massive, like at least an inch thick. It was... it's one of those things where it's like, it's technically portable, but I don't think it could actually fit in most kids' pockets. But the Game Boy Pocket could fit in the pocket. It had 2 AAA batteries. Both both of these systems, the Game Boy originals, all have the same problem, and if you get one of these nowadays, you're going to have to fix the screen because a lot of them have issues with their polarizers. I don't think it's worthwhile to get them nowadays. I think you should just probably get a Game Boy Color and then, use the backwards compatibility to play them, or a Game Boy Advance and do it, or even a 3DS, not a 3DS, an original DS. But the Game Boy Pocket is technically better, but it's still Game Boy original. Game Boy Light was only released in Japan. It was similar to the Game Boy Pocket, except it featured a backlit screen for playing in the dark. It ran on 2 AA batteries. I imagine that battery life was even worse. But again, it is better than the Game Boy original, but it still has that Game Boy original library. Pocket Pikachu, honestly, banger. Like, okay, they're both monochrome. The Pocket Pikachu can only play one thing, and that's Pocket Pikachu. Yeah, but Pocket Pikachu was really good. Like, V-Pets make so much sense for Pokemon, and Nintendo's just not doing them. And every time they've done it, they've done it on these small scales and never really gave it a proper chance. A Pokemon V-Pet game would do numbers, and they keep adding little mechanics into Pokemon to try and get you to do that little bit, but they never really go whole hog into the virtual pet games. But the ones that they have done that with are really fun, and Pocket Pikachu is something that I really enjoyed. And because of that, I'm of course going to put the gold and silver version up there. The gold and silver version I played more, and they're just really fun little devices, and that's the point of games, right? Is they're fun. Game Boy Color, I don't have much fondness for the Game Boy Color. How many bits was the Game Boy Color? Or was the Game Boy Color? It was color, but was it 16-bit? It was still 8-bit. Okay. So really it was just a portable NES, and there were a lot more games on the Game Boy Color that were of something that I would be interested in, but I really haven't messed with the system all that much. I do have every game on a ROM on my handheld, so maybe I should go back and take a look at it. There's nothing that really jumps out and speaks to me as like something I have to play on it, but I would say it is pretty good, and I do think it is a massive step up above the Game Boy original. This was also my first video game system, and people say like, you're always super nostalgic for your first video game system, or your first video game system is the thing that you remember the most fondly or like the most. The Game Boy Color was just okay. It had Pokemon, and that's all I played on it. Like, I can't remember a single other game that I played on it besides Pokemon Red. Oh, I guess I played Gold and Silver, but that's it. I can only think of the Pokemon games. I can't think of any other Game Boy Color game that I've ever played. Besides, recently I played Ham Hams Unite, but I would put it in a C. Game Boy Color, GBC, C for GBC, but it is a step backwards that it didn't come with a backlight, because they shown that they are capable of doing lights. They just didn't. Yeah, and it was backlit screen, not front lit. So it was the good kind of light. So they showed that they were capable of it. Like, the Game Boy Color could be B tier, but it didn't have a backlight built into it. Still had to use those gross worm lights. I mean, I love the worm lights. Game Boy. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, the Switch is on here twice because the Switch is a home console and a portable, and as a home console, I think it was a B. Game Boy Advance, honestly, S tier. Best Nintendo system. Absolute 100% my favorite. It had everything on it that I could ever want. It had platformers, even if I wasn't big on platformers. It had every Castlevania that I've loved. It has numerous RPGs, multiple Final Fantasy remasters that are better than their originals. And honestly, Square, you should not be charging as much as you do for the Final Fantasy remasters when I can just go back to the Game Boy Advance for free. Anybody can. It takes 5 seconds to download a Game Boy Advance ROM and get to playing Final Fantasy IV. And it was 32-bit, so that was a huge leap to go from the 8-bit of the Game Boy Color to 32-bit on the Game Boy Advance. And the Wonder Swan was between these, and the Wonder Swan Color was also between these, and it was a 16-bit color system, so it was a pretty big step above the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy original. Even then, it didn't do as well, but the Game Boy Advance is what we're actually talking about. And the Game Boy Advance was 32-bit, totally killed the Wonder Swan off, unfortunate, but the Game Boy Advance was a better system in every way, and not necessarily just because it was 32-bit, but because the library was there. The library was full of great, amazing, excellent games. The Game Boy Advance, I like more than all of these other systems. Like, every good memory I've ever had is on the Game Boy Advance, and the Game Boy Advance is, oh well, this is the Game Boy Advance original model, so maybe we'll put it down here in just A, because it didn't have a backlight. but it's still, without the backlight, is my most played handheld. Pokemon Mini. I played this recently. I did a video on it on my other channel. I'll be moving it over here soon. I just wanted to put something new up so that y'all don't get tired of the reposts, in case you've seen those reposts before. The Pokemon Mini had, I think, 14 games total, and 10 of those, I think, were Japanese only, and then 4 of them were European, and 3 of those 4 were in the US only. Despite this system launching in the US first, it launched only in the Pokemon Center stores, which I think only New York existed at the time, the New York Pokemon Center. No, the city New York. No other cities existed. Maybe it would have sold better if that was the case. The Pokemon Mini is not bad. It's like the Pocket Pikachu, but it has removable cartridges that you could use to swap and play different games. And if you haven't played it, it's a neat little system. Pretty cheap, relatively speaking, because no one is nostalgic for this system because so few people bought it. It was dead in the water upon launch. They launched it after the Game Boy Advance, or around the same time as the Game Boy Advance, and they just had their things two-way spread out. So it failed on arrival because it was competing with the Game Boy Advance, and they were competing with themselves, and they just stopped supporting it. What it was built for was built for even smaller play sessions than the Game Boy Advance. The Game Boy Advance was a system you played on the go. Maybe you played it on the park during recess. The Pokemon Mini was made for even smaller units of times. This is like time on the toilet. This is time waiting for the bus to arrive. Time spent sitting on the subway, riding from location to location as you get off to go on to other ones. This was meant for very small units of time. And it did have some impressive stuff. It had large multiplayer lobbies. I think it was up to 20 on one of their games with just their infrared. And it had a gyro sensor in it. It had a lot of neat features. It's a really cool system. When that video does come back over here, you definitely should check it out because there's some crazy stuff on there. And like I said, Nintendo didn't really mess with V-Pets all that much, but they did release one V-Pet game, and it was their final game on the Mini, and it was Pokemon Breeder. And in it, you took care of either a Torchic, Mudkip, or Trico, and you raised them, and you took care of them like a V-Pet. If that was a launch title, I could see the system selling really, really well, but that was before the third generation Pokemon started, so that wasn't possible. I think the Pokemon Mini is a good console. It just came out at the wrong time and did not get the attention that it deserved. Had they opted to release it in more stores, I think it would have been a lot better because this was during the time that Pokemon could do no wrong. Pokemon was in every house. So I do think it's a C. I don't think it's completely valueless. If I was offered a Pokemon Mini or I saw one in person, I would pick it up and start playing with it immediately. I probably wouldn't even ask the owner first. The Game Boy Advance SP. Now, my opinion on this is like a lot of people's opinions. I really like the screen and the backlight, but I don't like the shape. Some people like the shape because it closes shut, it's a clamshell, it's super pocketable, super portable. I was already a teenager when the system came out. I think I was a freshman in high school, maybe 8th grade or something, I don't remember. But I was a teenager at this point, and I had been very accustomed and very used to the Game Boy Advance and its big ergonomic grip and shape. And the Game Boy Advance SP did not have any of that. It was not ergonomic, it was not comfortable to hold, it was not good for long play sessions, but it's still probably the best version of the Game Boy Advance that there is just because of the backlight. Now, there are multiple versions of the Game Boy Advance SP. The first model is the one that I currently have right now, which has a front light, but the front light is really, really bad, and it makes the colors look all washed out and dim. It doesn't light up the screen well, and it doesn't make the screen brighter. It honestly looks better without the light. It doesn't do it very good. It make it look bad. But if you get the AGS 101, which is the one that everybody likes, that's a really good backlight. And most people don't try to update it to an IPS screen or anything like that. Most people don't mod their Game Boy Advance SP screens because the AGS 101 is just ideal. That said, I don't like the ergonomics of the GBA SP, but the GBA SP did have a backlight. So I think these two are at least even. I think the Game Boy Advance Original's form factor is better, but the backlight is better on the GBA SP, and the GBA SP had a lot more alternate color schemes that I really liked. They both play the same library, of course. If you played Game Boy Color games or whatever, they stuck way out, and that was way more uncomfortable on the SP because the SP was basically shooting the games out into your palms. The DS. The DS had a lot of good software on it and a lot of good RPG games. And it could play your Game Boy Advance games. And it was a clamshell. And it was wide and had a good form factor. Technically, I should be putting it in the S. But the dual screen wasn't always additive. Sometimes playing a Game Boy Advance game on this, you had to choose whether the game displayed on the top screen or the bottom screen. And that just meant you always had one screen that wasn't used. And it just made me wish that the original had a backlight. So I kind of think that it's still A tier. It's still not the best, and the Game Boy Advance backwards compatibility was kind of just tacked on because I think Nintendo wasn't really confident that the DS was going to do well yet, so they had to put the Game Boy Advance cartridge slot on it to get people to want to buy it so that they would, buy it, and then they had their Game Boy Advance games to tie them over until a new DS game that came out that they wanted. But I got it the Christmas the year it came out, one of the few consoles that I got the year it came out, and it had Nintendogs on it, and Nintendogs is a banger. Who doesn't love Nintendogs? But honestly, that's really the only DS game that I can remember, that I remember playing at all. The GBA Micro. This is a system that I want, and I've always wanted. Ever since that I was aware of it. I don't care that it's super small. I've always wanted it because it was so fashionable. It was gaming as an accessory, and I really like the idea of that, but it's so gosh dang tiny, and I would never play it if I had it now. But it was a better version of it. It was like the other Game Boy Advances, but it was better in its own ways too. I just think it's too small to play practically. I don't think if many of us had it these days that we would find it very comfortable, because there is such thing as too small. I've got an RG Nano, and I can tell you that having an RG Nano didn't make me play emulated games more. It made me play them less because I was like, I have to look at that tiny screen, or I have to use these really tiny, gross controls. So there is such thing as too small, and I think the Micro does delve into the too small territory. I think this is the DS Lite. It's the same thing as the DS, just smaller. I don't think that makes it worse or better. The DSi. Did the DSi play Game Boy Advance games? I don't remember. I skipped over this one, but I've got two of them because other people got them. Second redesign of the Nintendo DS family. It is slightly bigger, thinner, and brighter than the DS Lite. It was the first Nintendo handheld to feature multimedia. It had a 3.0 megapixel camera, and that you could have fun with by editing pictures, etc. It also featured a music app where you could record your voice and then play around with it. You could also listen to music. Lastly, it featured the shop app where you could download games, etc. The backwards compatibility for Game Boy Advance games disappeared in this version of the DS. So yeah, I think the DSi is a worse version of the DS because it doesn't have that Game Boy Advance slot. I think removing functionality makes systems worse, and so of course the DSi XL is going to be there too. Not having a Game Boy Advance cartridge slot actually made it worse. The addition of the eShop is a good idea, but the games that were on the Nintendo DSi shop were not good. Most of them sucked. And the games that were made exclusive for this system, of which there are incredibly few, I think it's less than double digits, and they all use the camera. And the Nintendo 3DS line, I think all of them are really good. For the short time that I had a Nintendo 3DS, it was the best thing ever. But I got rid of it when the Switch came out because I didn't have that many 3DS games and I was moving over. I really only had Monster Hunter, but I had a 2DS, and honestly, I was so willing to get rid of that because of its slate design, it just being a brick. I think it's probably the worst execution of any of the DS lines. It's not sacrificing portability. It's still very portable, but it is one of the most uncomfortable handhelds I've ever played on. It's big and it's square. It's not ergonomic like the Game Boy Advance. So for that reason, I'm putting it in the C category because I think it's the worst form factor for the DS, but I do think the 3DS line, I've never played the 3DS line. I've never played on these 3DS systems, so I honestly can't give you a very good opinion of them, but I really do want the 2DS XL. The short amount of times that I did play on the 3DS systems, the 3D effect didn't look good to me. The stereoscopic 3D, I think is what it's called. I didn't think it looked good. I didn't think it added anything. It didn't make the games better. So it was an unnecessary added expense that didn't make games better, but just made the system more expensive. And Nintendo has a really bad habit of adding features that aren't going to be used by most people or aren't very useful in general. And that gimmick does sell the system, but on the other hand, the gimmick does make the system worse. I do think the Nintendo 3DS wouldn't have succeeded if it didn't have that 3DS function, because that's what got people talking about it. But I don't think it made the games any better. If I had a 2DS and it does work out how I expected it to, the 2DS XL, the new 2DS, I would put it in A tier if it works out how I think it does. But I don't have one, and I've never really played any of the 3DS library, but I know the 3DS library is full of really, really good games. I just don't have a 3DS. Okay, so Switch portable version. So Switch on the go. I think Switch on the go is better than Switch as a docked home console. As a docked home console, 1080p 60 FPS does not exist. So I would play the console in 720p, and it would get 60 FPS on a lot of games, but not enough for me to have wanted to play it all the time. I do think the handheld form of the Switch is better than the docked version, but I don't think it's better enough to put it into the A category, although I know a lot of people really do like the Switch, because I'm stuck here now because like I want to say the Switch Lite is better. I played on a Switch Lite, my wife had a Switch Lite, I played on it a while, I really liked the form factor, but it didn't have an HDMI out, and I really need HDMI out to make videos, so that was a big selling point for me, is being able to have HDMI. So the original Switch is something I stuck with for a very long time, even though the launch Switch was really bad, and I didn't feel the need to upgrade to the OLED. I do think the portable version is better, but it is still just the same Nintendo Switch. You get the same experience, I think, by playing it in 720p. So the Switch Lite. The Switch Lite was the Nintendo Switch, but portable. The Joy-Cons didn't come off, it was built into the system. There is bad stuff about that because, of course, no Hall effect at the time, and, well, the Switch 2 isn't going to have Hall effect either, which is crazy to me because everything has Hall effect now. My $30 8-bit Do controller has Hall effect, but that's not relevant right now because the Switch 2 isn't even out yet, so I'm not ranking it. The Switch Lite I do think is better than the Switch original. It's just, like, aesthetically, every Switch Lite system looks so good, but it's still too big to be portable, and it didn't have HDMI out. It needs to have HDMI out for me to want it. Even like handheld consoles, like any of the handheld consoles here, like if they had HDMI out, I would put them a bar higher. Like if the Game Boy Advance had an HDMI out, I probably would have put it in the S slot. Switch Lite is better than the Switch, but it doesn't have HDMI out, and I need HDMI out. So technically, I would put it in the A category, and I will, because aesthetically speaking, I think it is an aesthetic, and like if the Switch Lite ever goes on like a big steep sale, I would probably get one, just because, you know, they look good. Now, the other Game & Watch ones. These are Game & Watch anniversary systems that came with NES original versions of games that you could be playing portably. I really don't know who these are for, other than maybe buying it for a dad who likes old Nintendo. That's really who these are for, is for dads. The control scheme for these are really bad. The D-pad and the A-B buttons and select and start are at the very bottom of the system, which makes it not very ergonomic. But they're not ergonomic to begin with because they're just rectangles. But I think by putting the buttons at the very bottom, you're supporting all the weight from the bottom of it, and then you have all this overhang from the top. It's not cupped and protected or held by your hands as a Game Boy Advance would be. I think the ergonomics are particularly bad. They only play one game when they very easily could have made it play immensely more. This thing has got room for an SD card mini. They could have done what they did with the Switch, not the Switch, the NES Classic or the SNES Classic. They could have loaded these with games, and they didn't. They gave us one apiece, and there is a billion ways to play Super Mario Bros. Original, and this is not even close to the best one of them. Zelda 1, I don't like Zelda 1. Link to the Past is a better version of Zelda 1. I think it's a better replacement for Zelda 1. And Zelda 1 just, it's not great. Like, it's a good first stepping stone, but it's like, it's nothing I'm nostalgic for despite playing it. It's nothing I had fun playing when I was playing it. I think honestly this is what burned me on the entire series, was the first one, which is so silly to say. The sequel looked more interesting to me, but I never played it. But I think it being on the Game & Watch handheld would obviously make it worse because of the, like I said, with the ergonomics and the shape and stuff like that and the appearance. And like I said, these things are pointless. These exist for dads. They exist for funny, quirky gifts to give that one dad who's really techie. So I also think that it belongs to the dumpster. I don't think they're good handhelds. Like, I don't even think they're good for collector's value. But I know there's people out there that want them just for collector's value because they're talking points or whatever. But the point of like a Game & Watch handheld is that it plays Game & Watch, and then they instead put these old NES games on it, which seems kind of dumb to me. So I'm noticing here that I don't have a single system in the S slot, and I think that's because of the Game Boy Advance here and the DS. I think the original DS adds an unnecessary gimmick, and that was the 2 screens. Some people are going to say that's necessary. It's a necessary stepping stone to get to the 3DS, so I get that. The DS should have been the ideal version of the Game Boy Advance for me, but it wasn't. I still played the Game Boy Advance the most on the Game Boy Original, so I think actually I'm going to put the Game Boy Original and the Game Boy Advance SP up on S tier, at least in terms of Nintendo. Within the isolated version of just Nintendo games and systems, I think the Game Boy Advance and Game Boy Advance SP belong at the top because they're both incredibly great. My ideal version, though, would be a Game Boy Advance Original that has the backlit screen of the AGS 101 Game Boy Advance SP, and that would be my ideal Game Boy Advance. But that Game Boy Advance doesn't exist, not released by Nintendo at least. I think maybe in the future, if we get an anniversary edition of that, maybe that'll happen. My favorite Game Boy Advance is, of course, the original, but I really do like that backlit screen on the fold-out one. As an adult, I appreciate the ergonomics of this one. As a kid, I spent a lot of time playing with the portable version. I have a lot of memories on these 2 systems. But that's it. Thank you everybody for watching. If you like this video, consider checking out my blog. I post stuff there sometimes. A lot of it is exclusive, and I post exclusives here too. So, gosh, you're just gonna have to check out both. So my blog is on nimzynova.com, and I am here on YouTube, of course. And when the Switch 2 comes out, if nothing bad happens that keeps me from getting mine, I will be streaming my opening of it and playing games and stuff and testing out the stuff on it day 1. So as soon as it gets in my home, I will be doing an unboxing and stuff like that, and you can watch that on Twitch, twitch.tv/NimzyNova. I don't plan to do streams quite as regularly there yet. I do want to build up more of an audience here before I try to do streaming in general, but I think you should check it out when I'm live, and if you can't, I'm sure I'll post some video from it here, but that's it for now. I've already gone on for very long and my throat is very dry, so I'll see y'all later. Bye. Bye 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 bye.